And another thing we're going to do is we're going to cover Bad Religion right now, who's another, now for something completely different end of things. So I know I put the handshake in the montage, but I don't know if I sent you a second track. Did I, Josh? What did I end up picking for the second one?
You
It was the
said the
handshake.
handshake, and the
Yep.
segment is marked.
Matt, give us the numbers, please.
Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion comes in at number 406 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 54 in 1994, number 2,277 of all time. It is Bad Religion's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Bad Religion is ranked number 516 of overall artists on Best Ever Albums.
All right, so Bad Religion, founded in 1980, guys. It was the first
That's
year
crazy.
that Bad Religion came out. So by the time they released this album, they were 14 years into their career. And by the way, that is not even mid-career for them, because they are still going strong and touring to this very day with many of the original members. So they are one of the true warriors right there. I did laugh at the beginning, and it was not pejorative them saying this, but they said, out of all the Southern California hardcore punk bands of the early 80s, Bad Religion has stayed around the longest. So that is definitely one way to put it that sounds like backhanded praise, but it wasn't in the case of this. They made their debut album all the way in 1982, and their most recent album was 2019's Age of Unreason as well. So they do have plenty of political themes, as I think is obvious when you listen to this album and other Bad Religion albums. So they were formed in Los Angeles, California, as I mentioned, in 1980, and they are known for covering political, religious, societal, media, scientific type themes within their songs. And they are part of the beginning of the LA punk scene, which I think some bands that we've covered who were part of that are bands like X and the Descendants. We didn't cover the Germs, but they were another band in that. There was the New York punk scene and the London punk scene as well. And the LA punk scene probably has the longest running presence, even though it was probably 3 of 3 in terms of the real, punks, in terms of how they viewed it, because things like pop punk and stuff like that were evolutions of this style of punk. So the members of the band, the original band, and boy, this lineup changes about 1,000 times seemingly through the years. But so the original OG lineup is vocalist Greg Graffin, who's actually the only member of the band still in the band to this day. Bassist Jay Bentley, guitarist Brett Gurewitz, and drummer Jay Ziskraut, who doesn't stay around very long. In fact, between their first EP and the first full-length record, Paul Finestone comes in to take over for him. And then the bass changes in 1983, and the band is just pumping out very well-regarded punk and hardcore albums. They're kind of right in that area where they're probably too melodic for true hardcore, but they're probably too heavy for like a poppier punk, especially in the 80s. Maybe not as much on this album, where they had a little bit more of a concerted effort. This is what we're covering today, Stranger Than Fiction, is their major label debut. So it's, calibrated a little bit more for a generalized palette, I would say. The band continues to gig. They're well known for very affordable all ages shows, and then their lyrical content and their political content stands out. They're considered kind of like a punk group's punk group, in that they're gigging and releasing albums. It's kind of like an album every year. And then they really started to take off when they released the combination of No Control in 1989 and Against the Grain in 1990. Those not only were well regarded in the punk scene, but they were critically acclaimed, and they kind of are, when you listen to them, the ultimate Bad Religion albums, in the fact that they're super edgy, but also you start to see the pop stylings the combination of that. They're sort of like a more polished version of Pennywise, who we've covered before in terms of the sonic palette, in case you're wondering. And that actually led them to 1993's Recipe for Hate. By this time, alternative rock had kind of broke into the mainstream, and record labels were kind of signing groups they wouldn't have signed before, hoping to like recapture kind of what grunge is. So they're signing a lot of like copycats for grunge, but also what they're doing is they're signing a lot of artists in other rock mediums in hopes that, you know, they sign the group that breaks a certain type of music, right? And in some cases it works, like ska, or like later like swing, modern swing and stuff like that. And other cases it doesn't, right? So Bad Religion was kind of signed. Their origin story is a lot kind of like what I think like Sonic Youth's was, where it's they made a lot of albums and they were very popular within the scene, and they were considered to be like a true working man's group in terms of craft, and they thought like maybe we can make them more popular, but they never were looked at as like a huge band. But and I think kind of what they were going for, Atlantic Records, was to like bring, you know, in a pretty well sounding group, but they liked the idea of them having the credibility and prestige as well, if that makes sense. So they originally released Recipe for Hate in 1993 on Epitaph Records. Now, Epitaph Records is a punk label, and is actually founded by Bad Religion's Brett Gurewitz. And he actually has to step away from the group after this album, Stranger Than Fiction, because Epitaph has an album that out of nowhere becomes the highest selling independent record of all times. Guys, want to guess what that album is?
Oh, geez. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was the highest selling independent record of all time for a very long time. They release a little album called Smash by The Offspring, which explodes. And the demands on this, the demands on this small little Epitaph record that was more like DIY punk go up, and he actually steps away because running Epitaph becomes a bigger job that he can handle being in Bad Religion. Around the same time, they also are the record label for Rancid, and Rancid also becomes a pretty popular band, so he was a busy dude during this time. So Stranger Than Fiction comes out right around the same time that Smash by The Offspring comes out, so you can see how that's fortuitous timing, you know, for this type of sound, because, you know, you're starting to see it represented in mainstream, and as the decade goes on, you'll see a little bit of this LA punk sound become really, really mainstream through things like, you know, Blink-182 is the example that comes to mind, and Green Day, for that matter, even though they're from San Francisco. Those are groups there. Interestingly enough, Gurewitz, you know, they're on Atlantic while he runs Epitaph, who'd put out some of their other albums, and he was actually pretty displeased they signed a major label contract, so he stepped away, and he was actually replaced by Brian Baker, and that's a name we know as well because he was in Minor Threat, and that's who ends up stepping in for him on this tour. There is like a shit ton other stuff with Bad Religion, and I'll try to weave in fun facts as we talk about the group. But let's go right into the takes. Josh, can't imagine this isn't in some ways in your lane.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I've kind of grew up listening to Bad Religion on a million different like punk compilation records. I don't think I've ever listened to a actual Bad Religion album. This is a good one to start with. It just kind of has that nostalgic feel to it for me. It just sounds like my mind's eye of like what classic like punk rock should sound like. It's fast. It's got you know, it tries to have a message or comment on the lyrics, and I also like Bad Religion because they harmonize too. I think that adds a really good element and gets to some of those pop sensibilities that you were speaking to. It's just really, it also does kind of, like you say, it is reminiscent of what comes later with like Offspring and Green Day. I definitely noticed some similarities there, although I think those bands are different than Bad Religion in some ways. The I just love the kind of rapid up-tempo nature of this record. The guitars are really good, and I think overall it's a pretty quick album. I think I would need to listen to it more to kind of get some of the nuances in terms of individual songs. They started to like kind of a lot of punk records, when you listen to it at length, they kind of blend together. At least they do for me, the songs. So, but at like 42 minutes, this is pretty, actually it's like less than that. I think there's a couple bonus tracks on the album. It's like 38 minutes, but some standout tracks for me include Leave Mine to Me, The Handshake, which you used in the montage. I liked Slumber a lot, and 21st Century Digital Boy, which I would imagine is a reference to T-Rex, right? in some way, at least
in some
title.
ways, yeah. It's also was on an earlier album, and this is a remake of it. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I think those are good examples of kind of what this band has to offer. I don't really have kind of a lot of complex thoughts. I just really enjoyed listening to it, and it was a kind of refreshing contrast to some of the other albums we listened to this week. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot of complex I don't think this is an album with complex thoughts that we could really wax on, but it's just it's great. This is like, yeah, I see here Wikipedia has it melodic hardcore, right? And so it's like, yes, it's hardcore, but it's also got it's I don't know if I would say maybe it's less edgy in some ways, but it's definitely got melody all over the place here. And that's really what I am gravitating towards.
Right.
It is fast. There's a ton of energy. I do like the vocals on this. Is it Graffin? He's the lead singer, right? Greg Graffin.
Correct.
It's and sometimes I find, like with hardcore or like punk, sometimes the voice of it gets really too aggressive, too guttural, or like kind of like in more what's happened in recent years, last 10, 20, 15 years or so with emo, like kind of like the high pitched, little bit of a whiny kind of a vocal styling, which I find a little off putting, and it kind of blends together. Like, you're not getting any of this. This is just kind of a straight ahead, just really good punk, just general punk voice that I think is I wouldn't say that it stands out in any way, and maybe that's why I like it, because I think when the vocals really stand out in like a punk type band or song, it's oftentimes I find if they're distinctive, they're oftentimes I don't really like it as much. But there's plenty of times throughout this record where I was listening to it and I just got a smile on my face, just like, that's a cool part. That's a really cool melody. Like, I love the part, like Leave Mine to Me is a really good example of that, where they just, midway through the song, they just break it down at and like in a totally different direction. And it's just really cool. It's just a very cool little curveball that they throw at you there. The only song I knew on this was 21st Century Digital Boy, and I've always liked that. I mean, I don't know how if you like rock or any type of punk, or how you don't like that. Like, it's, that's the other thing about this, that there's plenty of songs on here that even if you don't like punk music or like heavier music, I still think that there's plenty of things in here that a casual music listener will enjoy, because it is, again, rooted in that melody, and there's very catchy elements throughout. I like, there's some really cool bass lines in here too, like really fast bass lines that are happening, and when I really picked up on one of those, I was really impressed by what the bass player was doing, so I wanted to point that out as well. But yeah, just a fun record, and certainly those bands that you guys have mentioned, like Green Day, The Offspring, bands that would kind of come on in the wake of a band like Bad Religion, I definitely like I love Green Day. I love some of the stuff that The Offspring did. I know it's I don't know. Those are like the bigger bands, and so it's like, it's also not punk, right? If you're selling a ton and you're on a major label and all that stuff. But as just as a non-punk myself, just like a music lover of a lot of different genres, and particularly melody, I really do appreciate something like this. And so yeah, it's definitely thumbs up. And I was thinking about this because I think they're you mentioned that they're still touring or they're playing right now, John. I think when we did Social Distortion, I think they have a tour coming up, or maybe they're already on it right now, where they're playing together. And so Social Distortion was a band that I was thinking of when listening to this, and this hit me a lot more than the Social Distortion record. I still like Social Distortion. I still thought that was really good, but I think to me this is a different level. This is a kick up on the energy. It's a kick up on the melody, and it's great. And it would definitely make me want to listen to more Bad Religion, even though I would also, having said all that, it's kind of samey, right? It's not like, I mean, maybe Infected is a song that kind of stands out as like, we're going to take it down a notch or two. But I think it's saying something when it's a genre that I don't typically, it's not the first that I'm grabbing, when I'm putting music on, or that I'm a huge fan of, or that or in some cases not that familiar with. If I can listen to an album just a couple of times and feel that it's samey, but also love pretty much every song on it and want to listen to it and not get tired of it, right. I think that's definitely a way of saying it's high praise, right? So yeah, thumbs up. This was great.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I've listened to Bad Religion for a very, very long time. Social Distortion is a good comparative point. It's funny they're touring together because they share that sort of like flat affect singing. But yeah, Bad Religion has music I enjoy much more than Social Distortion does. That flat affect works better for me in like a hardcore or a punk context than it does in sort of like an alternative rock like lane, because I feel like I need more out of my vocals on those, where you can be monotone and or flat affect in conjunction, right, with aggressive music behind it, and it kind of works. And as Josh mentioned, there's also harmonies that accentuate that at times, and so it's not flat all the time, and that's a Bad Religion staple. This is probably like my 7th or 8th favorite Bad Religion album, so it's interesting we're covering this one, because I don't think this is one of their better albums. It's still got some strong stuff in it. The Handshake can stay right up there with any song Bad Religion's ever done. It's one of their best singles. There's multiple different, if you're trying to get into Bad Religion, you could check out their albums. They're also a great compilation band, whether you find them as Josh did. They're on like every Punkorama ever, so right. For those that listen to those, like there's at least one track there, because those are Epitaph releases, right? So it makes sense. There's a great compilation called All Ages for sort of the second stage of their career, which covers like the late 80s all the way through the 90s, and that's just filled with great songs. It's basically like the best songs on each album, so well worth checking out. There's also one that covers them from, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a compilation, like a live compilation from 80 to 87 or 80 to 88, which covers their earlier career, which is also awesome. They're a much more tied to hardcore band at that time, though, than this version. So if you like more the melodic punk, the All Ages compilation is more for you. But yeah, I love, I wouldn't say they're simplistic, because their lyrics, they're very straightforward. You don't have to guess. For those that like a little bit more nuance in their lyrics, I could see how maybe they don't work for them. In some ways, even though they sound nothing alike, their lyrics function a lot like how 10,000 Maniacs does, where it's like, this is an issue, we're going to tell you exactly how we think about it, we're going to sketch a narrative about it, oftentimes a story, and we're going to use that with catchy music to get across to you something that we're pissed about. I like the fact that they'll explore topics like, Copernicus, right, and stuff in their songs, or, media disenfranchisement, you know what I mean? Not being able to, not like in a, like, the fuck the media, right, but more in like the media doesn't tell you the whole thing, and sketching, and they kind of are ahead of the curve. They certainly come from a leftist point of view, so if that's a turnoff for you, you might not like them, but that's how they see the world, as how most punk sees the world.
Right.
Yeah, and they seem to produce their best albums when like wars are on, because there's just something about war that particularly offends Bad Religion, I feel like, and they're veterans, and they're masters of their craft. I've seen them live many times. They're always fun to see live. The energy is off the charts, and they still sound great even to this day. The last time I saw them was about 7-8 years ago, and you could draw a straight line between we mentioned, we've been talking about like, oh, in the 90s there's like Green Day and the Offspring, but like in many ways those, even Blink-182, those are more descendants of like different types of LA punk. Where you see this is things like Rise Against, right, which is like the reincarnation of Bad Religion. Just some, I think it's a different lineage to some degree, like what punk comes from here. This also like veers into the hardcore lane. It veers a little bit into that like punk ska hybrid lane, even though this isn't ska. It's got elements that would have in it later. And also there's a poppiness to this that is different than the poppiness of 80s Bad Religion. So if you're digging back to 80s Bad Religion, just be aware that it's a little bit more inaccessible. I would say that like where 80s Bad Religion lies is more accessible than like true hardcore, like Black Flag and stuff, but slightly less accessible than like what Fugazi was doing around the same time. And then by about like 85, 86, they start to have a little bit more of that lane that Fugazi was in, where they're still definitively punk and hardcore, but like a different strand of it, right? Like a little bit more of like what we call mainstream hardcore. So this one, though, like many Bad Religion albums, it's a thumbs up. I could see how someone would like this as like a compilation band more than they like the individual albums, and I do think you could do a lot worse than with this group, as much as I like them, than picking up that all ages CD, because you just get banger after banger on that, and you are getting the cream of the crop. And if, like Matt said, you find it a little samey at times, you get the best of what they do, and it's less likely to wear you out if you struggle with the somewhat sameness of the lyrics and the general structure of the songs. But still, easy thumbs up for me. With that being said, check out like Generator. That's probably Against the Grain, right? No Control. Those are, to me, the big Bad Religion albums, and might be where I'd start, maybe ahead of this specific one. They still maintain a little bit of the indie in them. There's a rawness to it that I appreciate. This a little bit more studio sleek. So yeah, but still easy thumbs up.
You wouldn't point them towards their Christmas album?
I would. I've heard songs, like a couple songs from it, but I'm not a big fan of Christmas albums in general, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that.
You don't say.
Yeah. The Christmas Songs album, yeah. 2013, yeah, it's actual Christmas songs, so there you go.
Yeah, I don't know if I needed that in my life, but yeah, start with those other three I mentioned, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. And all those were before this one, I assume?
Yes, they were all before this, yep.
Got it.
I listened to Age of Unreason, too, when it came out, and it was a pretty damn good album.